Hello everyone and welcome back to the program. The month of September was not a good month in the late 1930s. It was on September 1st, 1939, that Adolf Hitler's Nazi Germany launched an attack on neighboring Poland, triggering the worst ever war in human history. A year earlier, also in September, it was in Munich that Neville Chamberlain and Adolf Hitler signed a piece of paper that said Britain and Germany would never again go to war against each other. The Prime Minister returned to jubilant cheers in London. He declared peace for our time. The power of diplomacy had prevailed. The crucible of world war had been narrowly averted, or so it seemed. What are the lessons we can take away from this history? More important still, what does your Bible prophesy for the days and months just ahead of us? For the days immediately preceding the return of Christ to this earth.
The Trumpet Daily.
Munich is one of the most historic cities in Europe. It's full of culture, and for those who will remember, it's full of lessons. It was in Munich that one of the most important meetings in modern history took place. The Prime Minister of Britain, he was there. The Prime Minister of France was there. The Prime Minister of Italy was there. And so was the Chancellor of Germany. Just 2 decades before, these nations had gone through the most terrifying war in human history. Warfare had taken a huge technological leap forward. This was the war of the machine guns, aircraft, tanks, artillery, shells, bullets. This was a worldwide horror story. 20 million people died. Europe and much of the world was shell-shocked after that cataclysm. But soon there were serious problems between the nations again. Everyone was completely terrified of another war. Almost everyone. So Neville Chamberlain and Edward Daladier came to Munich, and along with Benito Mussolini, they sat down with Adolf Hitler, and they gave him what he wanted. He wanted a chunk of Czechoslovakia. And Czechoslovakia, of all things, had no say in the matter. Czechoslovakia was thrown to the wolves in hopes of preserving the peace. And that led to this famous black and white clip. Take a look.
This morning, I had another talk with the German Chancellor, Herr Hitler. And here is the paper which bears his name upon it as well as mine. Some of you perhaps have already heard what it contains, but I would just like to read it to you. We, the German Führer and Chancellor, and the British Prime Minister have had a further meeting today and are agreed in recognizing that the question of Anglo-German relations is of the first importance for the two countries and for Europe. We regard the agreement signed last night and the Anglo-German naval agreement as symbolic of the desire of our two peoples never to go to war with one another again.
Notice the cheers there at the end. After the horrific shock of the Great War, you can understand why people cheered so hard. Those cheering people wanted rest. They didn't want war. They didn't want confrontation. They were thrilled with Chamberlain. That was on September 30th, 1938, and less than a year later, Hitler started World War II, and by the end of that World War, more than 50 million people had been killed. Let's begin our study today over in 2 Timothy and chapter 4, the New Testament epistle that Paul wrote to his assistant Timothy. You can look at chapter 3, as we've done so many times on this program, and see in verse 1 that this is for the last days. In the last days, the Apostle Paul said, dangerous times are coming. And then you move into chapter 4, and we'll start in verse 3. It says, for the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine, but after their own lust shall they heap to themselves teachers having itching ears, This is for the last days, and Paul says there's a time coming when they won't endure sound doctrine. I mean, we can look at some of that black and white footage from 1938 and say, well, we would never do that today. We could never make a mistake like that today. We would never sit down with Adolf Hitler today. Hindsight, as they say, is 20/20. But what about these prophecies? Could we make the same mistake all over again? Look at verse 4. Paul says, "And they will turn away their ears from the truth, and shall be turned unto fables." They're going to turn away from the truth. They won't accept the truth. That's what it says in the New Testament. We'll see it in the Old Testament here in just a moment. Look at what Winston Churchill had to say after those jubilant cheers back in 1938. He said, "I do not grudge our loyal, brave people who were ready to do their duty no matter what the cost, who never flinched under the strain of last week. I do not grudge them the natural, spontaneous outburst of joy and relief when they learned that the hard ordeal would no longer be required of them at the moment. But they should know the truth," he said. He's saying, I can understand why people were so excited and happy and joyous at the news that we have peace in our time. But they should have been told the truth. The problem was with the leaders. The problem was with Fleet Street, with Parliament, with 10 Downing Street. They were concealing the truth in hopes of obtaining this piece of paper, a temporary peace, as it turned out. Well, it wasn't even peace at that, certainly not for Czechoslovakia. And then 11 months later, here comes the Nazi war machine into Poland, and another world war. Let's go back to the Old Testament. This is Isaiah again, just to ask if this is possible. Is it possible this could happen again? Could we see this history repeat itself? Look at what the prophet Isaiah says. You can see in Isaiah 30 that this too is for the end time. We'll go to Isaiah 30 here in just a second. But start in Isaiah 56 and verse 10. It says, "His watchmen are blind. They are all ignorant. They are all dumb dogs. They cannot bark. Sleeping, lying down, loving to slumber." I mean, look at the picture here that the prophet paints. The nations are in trouble. There's danger all around. And yet these watchmen, when they should be sounding the alarm, they've gone to sleep. They've gone right to sleep. Continuing in verse 11, let me read this in the Revised Standard Version. It says, "The shepherds also have no understanding. They have all turned to their own way, each to his own gain, one and all. Come, they say, let us get wine. Let us fill ourselves with strong drink. And tomorrow will be like this day, great beyond measure." I mean, time's just going to go on and on. These are good times. There's nothing to worry about. There's nothing to fear. Everything's just getting better and better. There's lots of people in the world that think that way. And yet all through the Bible, we see these latter-day prophecies where God says we better be vigilant, we better be sober, we better be watching world events. We have a booklet that we're going to offer today. Nuclear Armageddon is at the door, and it's based on a prophecy from Jesus Christ, Matthew 24. We've gone through that prophecy so many times before on this program. Jesus prophesied of worldwide conflagration right at the end time, right at the last days, the days immediately preceding his return to this earth. That's a blessed event that's referred to in hundreds of prophecies. Jesus Christ's second coming, do you believe it? Do you believe it's coming? Do you believe it's going to happen? You should. I mean, if you believe the Bible, you should. Let's go over to Isaiah 30, as I say. You can see here in this chapter where this book is obviously for the last days. Verse 8, it says, "Now go, write it before them in a table, and note it in a book, that it may be for the time to come forever and ever." God wanted him to write it down, this prophecy. He wanted Isaiah to record it, to put it in a book, so that you and I could study it today, so that we could anticipate what's coming on this earth. There's so much in prophecy, there's so many takeaways from the history as well. Look at what was happening in 1938. As Churchill said, you could hardly blame the people for being so excited. But then what happened? A world war that was much worse than the Great War. Continuing in Isaiah, verse 9, it says that this is a rebellious people, lying children, children that will not hear the law of the Lord. It says, which say to the seers or the prophets, see not, and to the prophets, prophesy not unto us right things, speak unto us smooth things, prophesy deceits. See, in these last days, it's not going to be just the leadership. It's also the people who want to hear smooth things. They just don't want to think about these prophecies. I mean, nuclear Armageddon, we just want to put it far, far away. But that's a dangerous way. That's a dangerous way to live. Look at what Churchill said. This was back in the early 30s. He said, I cannot recall at any time when the gap between the kind of words which statesmen used and what was actually happening in many countries was so great as it is now. The habit of saying smooth things, just like it says here in Isaiah, smooth things, and uttering pious platitudes and sentiments to gain applause without relation to the underlying facts is more pronounced now than it has ever been in my experience. See, politicians seeking after applause rather than relating the facts to the people, telling the people what's actually happening. God tells us in many prophecies what is happening in the last days. And it's up to you to listen to that warning, to listen to that message. Nuclear Armageddon is at the door. That's a new booklet. We just produced this last year. And then this one here, Winston S. Churchill, The Watchman. When we come back from the break, we'll look at a prophecy in Ezekiel 33, referring to the role of a watchman and warning people to make sure that you heed the warning, that watchman warning. Ezekiel, as I say, we'll go through that in just a moment, Ezekiel 33. And if you'd like to study the book at length, then request Ezekiel, the end-time prophet, as well. Just stay tuned and take the information down so that you can call our operators today and request all of the free material on today's program. We'll be right back.
The Trumpet Daily.
Leading up to World War II, even in 1939, the very year that the war began on September the 1st that year, and the media and the government in Britain were talking about a golden age was about to dawn on the world. And it was just about it was the worst nightmare they'd ever experienced that was about to come upon them. So actually the media and the government and the people that were supposed to be warning them and telling them about what was coming were all wrong. They were all wrong about what was going to happen. Well, what about...
That clip's from my father's television program from back in 2009, talking there about the lead up to World War II and how so many were proclaiming peace. They were saying peace, peace, peace in our time. But then look at what happened. Look at the dreadful facts on the ground. Let me just refer you again to something Winston Churchill said following the Munich surrender. He said, I'll begin by saying what everybody would like to ignore or forget, but which must nevertheless be stated, namely, that we have sustained a total and unmitigated defeat. And then he goes on to talk about how that the people deserve to know the truth. They should have been told the truth. And then maybe they would have acted sooner. Well, they acted. It was almost too late. But at least they did act in 1940. He went on to say, they should know, the people, they should know that there has been gross neglect and deficiency in our defenses. They should know that we have sustained a defeat without a war, the consequences of which will travel far with us along our road. They should know that we have passed an awful milestone in our history when the whole equilibrium of Europe has been deranged, and that the terrible words have for the time being been pronounced against the Western democracies, "You are weighed in the balance and found wanting." That's Churchill again, paraphrasing what you can read in the Bible, Daniel 5 and verse 27. God is weighing us, and we are found wanting. We are lacking in substance. Let's continue our study in the prophet Ezekiel's book. This is Ezekiel 33, as I said before the break. Be sure that you request our free booklet, Ezekiel, the End Time Prophet. It's a large booklet at that really takes you through an in-depth study of the entire book of the Bible, the book of Ezekiel. We'll study here briefly, Ezekiel 33 and verse 1. It says, "And the word of the Eternal came unto me, saying, Son of man, speak to the children of your people, and say to them, When I bring the sword upon a land, if the people of the land take a man of their coast, and set him for their watchman, if when he sees the sword come upon the land, he blows the trumpet and warns the people." Well, the people of Britain, they chose a man. As I said, it was almost too late in 1940, but they selected a watchman, and then that watchman really did sound the alarm. And Britain survived. Britain endured through its darkest hour, but still, look at what happened over the following 5 years or so. When Churchill came into office, just skipping down to verse 7, again, this is for the end time. There's some history here, going back to the World War II era, but most of this chapter is for our time. And verse 7 says, "So you, O Son of Man," here's God now, setting a watchman unto the house of Israel. And of course, we've offered the United States and Britain in prophecy on this program before. If you're unfamiliar with the teaching regarding the end-time nations of Israel, make sure that you request that booklet. But it says here, "Therefore you shall hear the word at my mouth and warn them from me." And so God is going to sound the alarm in this end time, in these last days. Most people won't listen. Most people will tune it out. But nevertheless, there is a watchman warning going out to this world today. Notice verse 8. God continues, "When I say unto the wicked, O wicked man, you shall surely die, if you do not speak to warn the wicked from his way. That wicked man shall die in his iniquity, but his blood will I require at your hand. Nevertheless, if you warn the wicked of his way, to turn from it, if he do not turn from his way, he shall die in his iniquity, but you have delivered your soul." God talking about the watchman warning over and again, I think 8 times from verses 3 to verse 9. It says, warn. You warn them. Warn them from me. Verse 10 continues, "Therefore, O you Son of Man, speak to the house of Israel. Thus you speak, saying, if our transgressions and our sins be upon us, and we pine away in them, how should we then live? Say unto them, As I live, says the eternal God, I have no pleasure in the death of the wicked, but that the wicked turn from his way and live. Turn you, God says, from your evil ways, for why will you die, O house of Israel?" God's talking here about the death of nations. I mean, look, that's happened in history. We can't look at these prophecies and just say, "Oh, well, we're far too advanced for anything like this to ever happen again." Look, as much as those first 2 world wars were definitely machine wars, machine guns, tanks, aircraft, all that, look at how much more weaponry we have on this earth today. And then to think about nuclear bombs. This is a dangerous world, just as Paul prophesied in 2 Timothy 3 and verse 1. We're living in the last days. Nuclear Armageddon is at the door, as our little booklet brings out. These are terrifying times. They certainly are if you don't know God's truth. I mean, there's hope, there's comfort, there's encouragement, there's safety in God's truth. But where else will you find refuge? Where else will you find safety and peace and comfort? in this very dark world. Look at the world today. Look beyond your front driveway or the street that you come through on your way home at night. Look at the nations of this world. Look at the leaders of this world. Look at the rise of strong men. Look at the problems that we're being burdened down from. Look at what we're going up against and confronting. Look at the division and the strife. It's all over this world. If your eyes are open to the truth, well, this watchman message goes out. Verse 28 says, "For I will lay the land most desolate, and the pomp of her strength shall cease, and the mountains of Israel shall be desolate, that none shall pass through. Then shall they know that I am the Eternal, when I have laid the land most desolate because of all their abominations which they have committed." And that is certainly true when you look at the history of our nations. When we go through these great colossal tragedies, whether it's World War II or World War I, or before that in the United States, the Civil War in the 1860s, those great struggles where there's so much suffering, coming out of that, people are more inclined to look to God and to wonder what it is that they've done wrong. But you don't see that much humility today. You don't see people turning to God. Turn you, God says. This is what it takes for most of our peoples to finally turn, to finally look to God. Verse 30 in the Moffat translation, "As for you, O Son of Man, your people are talking about you in the streets and at the doors of their houses, saying to one another, 'Come and let us hear what is the word from the Eternal today.'" There's some people that are listening to the message. They enjoy hearing the message, but they're not doing anything with it. That's where the breakdown is. Continuing in verse 31, "And they come unto you as the people come, and they sit before you as my people, and they hear your words, but they will not do them, for with their mouth they show much love, but their heart goes after their covetousness." See, they're hearers, but not doers. And so that's why it takes collapsing nations, dying nations, to finally get most people to sit up and to take note, to hear, and to begin to do, to turn to God in repentance, to turn to God in humility and faith. Verse 32, it says, "And lo, you are unto them as a very lovely song of one that has a pleasant voice and can play well on an instrument. For they hear your words, but they do them not." God says again, they hear the words, but they don't do them. Herbert Armstrong used to talk about many of the sermons and messages that he gave to large audiences who love to hear the message. They love to hear the prophecies of God, but they didn't do much with it. Look at Jesus Christ. Look at the thousands and thousands of people that he attracted during his 3.5-year ministry. And yet Acts chapter 1 says that when the New Testament church started, there were 120 people there. 120 that were actually committed to serving God and his work. Out of all of those thousands that Jesus encountered, it's astounding. We see that same spirit today. We're being weighed and found wanting. We're being weighed in the balance, as Churchill said in 1938, as Daniel the prophet says in Daniel 5. And we're found wanting. Well, look at verse 33, the last verse in the chapter. It says, "And when this comes to pass, lo, it will come, then shall they know that a prophet has been among them." See, when all of these prophecies come to pass, then they'll know, but it'll be too late by that point physically. So that's what's coming. You go back to the lessons from World War II, and you see our nation surviving, barely, waiting almost until it's too late. But here it says, when all these prophecies come upon us, and when it comes to pass, then they'll know that they actually were hearing a watchman warning message. But they just didn't respond to it, sadly. Make sure, as I say, that if you'd like to study the book of Ezekiel in particular, Ezekiel, the end-time prophet, call our operators today and we'll send you a free copy of this booklet out right away. And then also these two other booklets, Winston Churchill, The Watchman. He gave quite a Watchman warning message, if you know anything about that history in the lead up to World War II, and of course all during it as well. And then this booklet, which we produced just last year, Nuclear Armageddon is at the Door. Thank you for joining us on today's program, and we'll see you next time.